go ahead and bring everybody else in tune too.
Well, I mean, it's I hit the button already, and it's not going to be technically live. It's just now it's like cycling into the computer, So
Right?
I'll
No,
put an
we're good.
intro onto this. But yeah, you were explaining the HR thing, but I mean, you could roll with like explaining who you are. Hi, Joe.
Oh, yeah.
Good to meet you. Welcome to the podcast.
Hi, I'm Joe Evans, Libertarian congressional candidate for the state of Idaho. And right now, I'm actually an activist for a marijuana legalization group. It's called Kind Idaho. And what they're focusing on right now is medical marijuana in the state of Idaho. We are the last state in the United States to still be 100% hemp and cannabis illegal.
Idaho
And
is
yeah, Idaho is. We are the last bastion, the last foxhole of
staunch
purity and
prohibition.
prohibition, and oh yeah, absolutely. It's rather incredible, everything considered. So one of the things we got going on right now is our anti-cannabis groups have leveraged one of our one of our boomer legislators to come in and make sure that marijuana stays illegal in the state of Idaho forever and ever and ever.
I wonder how much BC money goes into keeping it illegal right there specifically.
Well, the thing is there can't be that much because we only have 1.3 million people in the entire state.
I have no idea.
Well, no, you don't. But we got about 1.3 million people in the entire state. So it's not like a huge market, keeping cannabis illegal in the state of Idaho specifically isn't making anybody rich. Okay, legalizing it in the state of Idaho doesn't really make anybody rich.
Well, some people, some very, very specific people.
Very specific people, like 7 dispensaries across the Oregon border.
Yeah.
So most of the Idaho population exists in this small little area around Boise. We call it the Greater Boise Metro area. And the Greater Boise Metro area includes this little town just across the Oregon-Idaho border in a county with 11,000 people in it. Okay, so the Greater Boise Metro area has 800,000 people.
It's huge.
Well, considering it's spread out over, 300 square miles,
Yeah, like geographically huge,
Yeah, geographically it's huge. But we got 800,000 people here in the greater area. And that 800,000 people last year spent $100 million in Oregon buying marijuana products.
Yeah, I mean,
100 million for less than 1 million people. That's $100 a piece on average, or $120 a piece over the, and of course, not all 800,000 of them are driving across the border to buy marijuana products.
Or admitting that they're from across the border.
Well, they can't not admit it. Because if you go across the border over into Oregon and you pull into one of the 7 dispensaries in that little town there, and you look at the license plates, 19 of 20 license plates are from Idaho.
That's a good town to be in. They got lucky.
Well, they did. Like I said, they made $100 million in sales.
Well, I mean, like you were saying before about nobody stands to making money keeping it illegal there. That town specifically, they make a little bit of money.
That town specifically. and true, the mayor of Ontario, Oregon, has come to Idaho,
Ontario, Oregon.
Ontario, Oregon. Yeah, you know, just a small little town in a county of 11,000 people. Um, the mayor of Ontario has actually come to testify in the state of Idaho to keep marijuana illegal in the state.
Shocking. Shocking.
Shocking. Yeah, we're all looking at him testify and go, we know why you want to keep it illegal in the state.
At that point, you can hardly blame the guy.
Well, no, you can't. It's 100 million in sales. That's a lot of business for a town in a tiny little county with 11,000 people.
That's a gold rush.
It really is.
Full on.
But people who are invested in those 7 dispensaries are doing incredible, as far as the amount of work that's getting, as far as the amount of revenue that's going specifically into that city. Now, the ironic thing is, okay, last year on Oregon, the entire state has about 4 million people in it. Okay, they sold $1 billion in marijuana products last year. Okay, $1 billion for an entire state of, anyway, I can't remember what the population in Oregon is, but a small little town in Oregon sold 10% of the entire sales for the state to Idaho residents.
That's totally insane.
Right?
I didn't know any numbers about Canada, so I Googled one and it said that apparently we paid 1.2 billion in all of Canada this year for legal weed. But that's a complicated topic because I don't know what it's like down there, but here, even after they legalized it, the black market didn't die. And I mean,
no.
And it's not even like they're doing that much worse. Right? Like there's a significant difference in what you get in both places.
Oh yeah.
Which is
well, but the thing is, and it's weird the way we look at it. Okay. So they legalize it. Now, as a libertarian, I'm against legalizing it because legalizing it means the government now regulates it.
Monopolizing it.
Yeah, they monopolize it. They create barriers of entry. They award dispensary licenses and they charge for those. And then they tax it all on top of that.
And it actually completely deletes the medical aspect of it, which is totally weird because up here, my medical rights dissolved when they legalized it for recreational use because I used to have medical rights because I fell off a roof, which meant that I could just consume and grow my own. And I had all of these medical rights, right? And then all of a sudden, Canada legalized it for recreational use, and I have to go to the pot shop where everything's taxed $7 out of 10, right? Straight into the government's pocket. And there is no medical market anymore. It doesn't exist. They all went to recognize. It's so much complicated, more complicated than people think to legalize.
Well, it's like I was listening to the podcast that you actually posted the other day, about the dispensary and the fact that for medical marijuana, they expected the growers to grow it for free.
Basically, it's all on the farmer all the time.
So once you move to recreational and it was taxable, they could at least sell it. They could start making a profit off of what they sold. So there was no need to sell for medical because medical wasn't going to pay them to grow it. Recreational paid them to grow it.
I blame the government,
Well, what's the fastest way to wreck a good situation? Get the government involved. But a lot of that's the same situation we have down here. You legalize it, the government's involved, and now they're starting to award dispensaries, they're starting to award grow licenses, and the black market's still cheaper. It's still less expensive to buy it off of the black market because your sellers aren't paying the tax stamps. Your sellers aren't paying for dispensary license fees. You know, all of these different taxes, they don't exist in the black market.
And they've also just been doing it longer. Like their supply
Well,
chain is pretty deep. They're good at it somehow, you know.
they are, but a lot of them, if there wasn't the legalization involved in the process, a lot of these black market marketeers would go honest as soon as it was decriminalized.
Well, it would just become honest, right?
Well, yeah.
Isn't that the whole
Yeah.
idea? Like I get all confused by the idea of involving the government in something that you're decriminalizing because the idea of it is that now you don't view it as a bad thing. Do you know what I mean? Like, what's the whole idea here?
Well, but see, that's one of the things that's interesting because if we decriminalize it, all we do is eliminate the legal codes that are associated with it. Okay. However, do we go through and destigmatize it?
Well, certain.
That's the question, because we can still maintain a social stigma to the use, but do we really want to do that?
Well, I mean, in certain cases, I guess you would say probably, like if somebody is doing awful things, then they should regulate themselves. And also, you probably shouldn't let children smoke weed. I would never suggest that. You know what I mean? Like, you got to be reasonable, but people are reasonable. That's, I don't know.
Well, and that's one of the things, you start looking at medical marijuana bills. One of the big things is childhood seizures. There's a medical justification for some children to have access to it.
That's true. That's true. I only meant like those things where they say it can make you develop your brain differently or something if you're smoking it at a very young age, but later on you're more resilient.
Well, that's the difference between recreational use as a child versus medical use as a child.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. There's no comparing the two,
So we start taking a look at the situation, do we maintain a stigma for it? Do we want to say, you can't recreationally use until you're 21? Down here, it's 21 for beer.
I mean,
it's 21 for tobacco.
But when did you really start to drink? I mean, in Minecraft. You know what I mean?
Right.
It's always going to be like that. So why do they even bother trying to control it? I just don't get it.
Well, it's one of the other things, though. When was it you started stealing your parents' opiates?
Never. That's sort of not something that's tempting because it's illegal. Although,
well, and a lot of that has to do with who we are as people. Are we the kind of people who won't do something because it's illegal, or do we think, well, it can't be that bad? I don't understand why it's illegal, so you do it, and next thing you know, you're using your parents' opiates recreationally, illegally, because you're screwing with their prescriptions. But it's like, how many people actually do that? What's the percentage?
Yeah, I have no idea. I mean, my parents never had any pills that I knew of, and if they did, I certainly wouldn't have been able to steal any without them noticing.
Not without having the talk.
Lord, no. I was not that savvy as a child. I was much more concerned with like chasing geese around in a forest, rather than.
That's not bad. That's a good childhood pastime to have. I will not deny that. Chasing the geese around and hoping they don't chase you back.
Exactly.
Because those suckers are mean.
I mean, everybody's so afraid of Canadian geese. I think that they're more of an asshole when they leave Canada because Canadian geese aren't really that territorial. I don't find up here, but
Well, okay, so we're in a Canadian geese migratory zone down here in
and I think
Idaho.
they go down there and nest, which would like explain a lot about them becoming more
Yeah,
asshole down there.
but even down here, the Canadian geese are pretty mellow. It's like they spend a lot of time apologizing. Uh, compared
Crapping
to
on
some of
golf
the
courses.
other, yeah, compared to some of the other kinds of geese we got down here, the Canadian geese are pretty mellow. You can walk into a gaggle of Canadian geese, and they just sort of go, whatever. Uh,
I don't
but
even know if we have other geese up here. I guess on farms, obviously, but
well, yeah, you got a few. So one of the things we got going on down here is we have a legislator who is trying to pass a constitutional amendment. Okay. Yeah, a constitutional amendment, something in our state government. It says this is what government can and cannot do. These are the laws they can and cannot write. Well, he wants to make a change to our state constitution that says all psychoactive drugs that are not already legal in the state are to remain illegal in perpetuity.
yeah, but that is like totally nonsense. You can make that law, but then later they can just change that law. Like, what does that even mean?
Well, I mean, that's part of the problem because it's a constitutional amendment. The process to go through repealing that constitutional amendment means it's probably 20 or so years down the road before we have people in the legislature that would approve repealing.
Oh, I see. It's a huge bureaucratic like hurdle.
Yeah, it creates a huge bureaucratic hurdle.
Can I
So
ask you a
right now,
question, Joe?
go ahead.
What are your feelings on like the whole collapsitarian thing about the growth through decay sort of thing?
Ooh, you want to go there? You want to
Not
go there?
necessarily. I'm just wondering on this topic because, like you're saying, 20 years down the road it might be a problem, but it's looking this year like it might not have that many legs on it.
Do we got 20 years of the United States left?
Oh, for sure. For sure.
Well, the United States as it is today, or just the United States as a concept, as an idea, because
I mean, Afghanistan lasted 20 years. I feel like you guys got it.
right,
But
we managed to keep Afghanistan alive for 20 years. Afghanistan as a war is now old enough. Libertarians have forgotten about it.
they can vote.
It can vote. Yes. The Afghanistan war is now old enough to vote. How does that make you feel? Oof.
Hey,
No,
I can't honestly, I can't wrap my head around that timeline because I'm a young person. And in my lifetime, I've watched that changing. You are probably, I would assume 2 or so decades ahead of me, which means you have an even different view on that. And it's just freaking mind boggling to think people.
okay. I am 52 years old.
So yeah, exactly 2 decades.
In 2002, before the Afghan March of 2002, no less, before the Afghan war was even 6 months old, I was deployed to Afghanistan.
You served in that war that we are talking about.
I served in that war that we are talking about before that war was even 6 months old.
And now you are a libertarian.
And we are talking about collapsitarianism.
I wasn't even going to go there. Yeah. It's funny how many veterans agree with that. Like,
but see, part of it is the forever war. Okay. And that's what this is. This is the forever war. It's the revival of the Cold War, which was the forever war before this forever war.
Yeah. And then World War II is an extension of World War I. It just, they keep stumbling backwards.
It keeps going on. But the thing is, all of the empires It was the forever war that signaled their collapse
Every time.
every time. Whether it was the Roman Empire, whether it was Chinese empires, whether it was, the Holy Roman Empire, whether it was Britain,
Yep.
the British Empire, the wars of colonization,
France.
Africa and India, Gandhi. Gandhi was responsible for the end of, the British Empire, because, Gandhi is what got Britain to leave India. But that was the whole thing. It's
Did they? Well, India, yeah. I mean, I meant the day about Canada.
Well, Canada still swears fealty to the Queen, and Australia too, to a certain degree. So there are brief windows where the sun will set on the British Empire these days. But the American Empire has replaced it.
Yeah, that one's bigger.
We have service members in 150 of 190 nations. The sun never sets on the U.S. military. We may not call them colonies like the British used to, but we have service members in 150 nations. We are an occupying force in 150 nations around the world. And whether we call them colonies or not, that's essentially what they are. The sun never sets on the United States military. We are Neo-Britain.
2.0.
Right? But as far as the collapsitarian goes, we're in the late stages of empire right now. If we go back in history and we evaluate all of the empires over the years, we are in the late stage of empire.
I mean, I agree with you, but it's gonna be a wobbly path to figuring out what comes next.
Well, and that's the thing is what will the collapse of the American empire look like?
And how does Joe do it from the inside? I mean,
well, I mean, that's a good question. But a lot of it is we're seeing a resurgence in libertarian values. The rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, the need to decentralize the power structures. And as much as I hate to say it, because every time you mention states' rights, it's a recall of the American Civil War. And the fact that the states' rights at the time were about the right to the institution of slavery, which is completely anti-libertarian. No libertarian believes slavery was ever just or ever deserved.
no, of course not.
Life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, and all people were created equal.
Except for robots.
Well,
fuck robots. I hate robots. They can be slaves. No, fuck robots. I don't like robots.
Well, at some point they're going to have that artificial intelligence, and they're going to have that self-awareness.
You'll feel bad for the robots. Don't tell me that, Joe.
We'll
never feel bad for the robots. Never. They're the silicone enemy, the devil.
We'll just give them all the personality of Bender, so that we can, we'll always hate them just because they're always jerks.
I would love the robots if they were all like Bender. That's hilarious.
But the idea about working from the inside is the fact that the collapse is inevitable.
Yeah.
Okay, so the question is do we control the collapse in allowing localized communities to develop their own leadership independent of the centralized control? Sort of roll things back to pre-Constitution, like the original Articles of Confederation.
That's actually what I was going to ask you about before. What is it still like in America? How before, when they were just the 13 colonies, each one was like its own little nation. And I know you kept some of that. I'm not sure if in Canada there's any of that, but I maybe you have a better shot of it down south, because like that's part of why Quebec and like Alberta can't separate from Canada legally or whatever, because they don't have that same ability.
Well, and that's one of those things that's interesting, because just about every organization that exists in the central government, there is an equivalent agency in each state. Okay, so like there's a Department of Education in Washington, D.C. Each state has a superintendent of schools, which performs essentially the same function. Each state has a governor, which performs the executive functions of the president for each state. OSHA. Each state has its own version of occupational safety and hazard.
I learned that to my discredit when I moved from Alberta to BC while I was on WCB. Not a good idea.
Right.
You want to stick in the same bureaucratic little notch.
Yeah. But so if the central government were to just disappear one day, we still have the same functions in each state.
I don't feel like that's the most likely option. I feel like it's just going to be replaced by something. Do you know?
And that's one of the dangers with the way that, because when the Roman Empire collapsed and Constantinople came in and recreated the Holy Roman Empire,
or Julius Caesar,
from the Republic. Caesar, the Republic. All he did was go back and reclaim each of the individual countries or states that had seceded from the original Roman Empire.
Yeah, and Napoleon too, I think, did the exact same thing.
Yeah, Napoleon tried to do the same thing. The European Union right now.
Yeah,
it's a revisit of the Holy Roman Empire. All of the countries just decided one day to, I guess we'll have the European Union. It was interesting that it was a bureaucratic accomplishment rather than a conqueror's accomplishment. Somehow the bureaucrats just decided to crown someone emperor of the European Union. Okay, well,
it's strange. I don't know how much
years or whatever.
Like, how much power does the EU have? Do they have? I don't really understand it, because like, you know how the UN has an army and all that. Does the EU? Like what?
Or does the EU just borrow the armies of all of its subordinate nations? Or does the EU just call on the United States, since the bulk of the EU nations are also all members of NATO?
Yeah, I think that's pretty much what Canada does too, call on America. That's what a lot of the world would do, call on America.
Honestly, though,
do you want to talk about
Army,
that?
Canadian Marines, those are some badass motherfuckers. Yeah, straight up. You guys got some sharp guys in your military up there.
Fair enough. I mean, we like to think that we're the worst equipped and best trained. That's like our motto. But
sounds about right.
I was gonna ask if
you guys train on our equipment, which is why you're so well trained, but you're so poorly equipped.
I was gonna ask if you even want to talk about that Russia-China stuff, but it might be a bit of too soon to really tell on that one. Wet paint.
The Russia and China stuff, that's an interesting discussion, but I mean, ultimately, it's a non-issue. Okay. Neither Russia or China has the force projection capability to invade the United States or Canada.
No. I mean that new thing where Biden was saying he's not ruling out using nukes. That's what I'm talking about.
Oh God,
Did you see that?
I must have missed that one completely.
That's like the darkest goddamn thing I've seen in a year.
Well, and that's one of those things. He's not even been in office a month yet.
I don't know if it's real though. That's why I was saying it's wet paint. Like that might just
Oh,
be fake news. I don't know. Like what do you believe anymore? It sounds like it
right.
could be true, but it sounds like it shouldn't
Well, I
be
mean,
true.
that
Also,
was the thing. That's why so many people elected Biden, was because they were afraid Trump was going to use the nukes.
yeah.
And here, less than 30 days into office, we got people saying Biden's ready to nuke Russia. Like,
Yeah.
wait. No, dude. No. That's not why we elected you, guy. Come
And
on.
isn't his defense secretary like a member of Halliburton or something? Just amazing George Bush 2.0, you know.
Yeah. Um, no, that's interesting. His Secretary of Defense. That's another ironic situation. I actually served with General Lloyd Austin.
You know the guy.
I know the guy.
Amazing.
I provide intelligence briefings for him during while he was commander of the Combined Joint Task Force 179 in Bagram, Afghanistan in 2004, 2005. He was a two-star general at the time. And he had been visited by none other than then Senator Hillary Clinton to receive an on-the-ground intelligence brief on what was going on in Afghanistan there at Bagram while
No
I was there.
way. No
Yeah,
way.
yeah. So I actually know General Lloyd Austin, and he's got a rather quick wit, dry sense of humor, but at the same time, he is a U.S. general,
And he's got
and
a history of the Clintons.
he's got a history with the Clintons. He's got a history with Biden. Joe Biden's son, the one that was actually a lawyer in Afghanistan, actually had an opportunity to interact and work with General Lloyd Austin. So General Austin's got a history with the Clintons as well as the Bidens.
The whole gang.
Yeah. So, it's sort of surprising seeing him come around, because he grew up during the Bush era. Well, he goes back even before that because he was a general by the time George Bush became, I think he was awarded his first star under Clinton, before George Bush was elected president. So I mean, it goes back and back and back. But that's the nature of things. That's the way the military in the United States works. The way they work their way up through the ranks, what they do after they retire. They go to work for Halliburton, they go to work for McDonnell Douglas. Because these are the lobbyists. These are the people they spend all their time around. Purchase agreements for equipment. Which group's going to sell us the most of something, when it comes up. It just keeps cycling and cycling and cycling.
Did you see how they called libertarians insurgents or terrorists or something? And
Oh yeah.
Everybody's joking about how it's time we get some belt feds. Where's the CIA money?
Where's my pallet of money?
Yeah.
Come on, right here, CIA.
I want to
now
do
that
some
I'm an
gender
insurgent,
studies.
I want my Toyota Hiluxes and my AKs and my pallet of cash.
I mean, I'm not even that not serious about that because Alberta has a fairly serious case for separatism. We could use some CIA backing. Let's Venezuela this country, you know what I mean?
There's
I'm
an argument
totally
for that,
joking.
John.
I'm totally joking. I'm gonna see like a
No.
red dot on the back of like the, it'll be reflecting in the window.
Well, okay. So one of the things that's interesting, is I come back and Alberta is just north of Idaho. The whole Pacific Northwest. You got British Columbia, Alberta, Idaho, Oregon, Washington State. A little bit of Western Montana right there. And there's a real strong religious fervor that goes on in the Pacific Northwest, right? You got the Christians of the Pacific Northwest. You got a lot of real religious type movements. Fundamentalist LDS is one. Matter of fact, British Columbia has a settlement up there of fundamentalist
Well, that's a huge
Latter-day
thing.
Saints.
Lots of colonies. There's
Yeah.
Doukhobors, Hutterites, Mennonites.
Yeah.
They-
So the religious freedom has just migrated to the Pacific Northwest. But along with that religious freedom, you also have a lot of fundamentalists who believe things, they go back to old school, the biblical thoughts on crime and punishment and, the moralities.
Yeah.
And so one of the things was, I did 3 tours in Afghanistan at the time and 1 tour in Iraq. And I was looking,
Dang.
we were fighting the Taliban, and the Taliban were these religious fundamentalists. These were Muslim fundamentalists.
Yeah.
So I get out of the military and I come back to Idaho, and boom, now I'm surrounded by all of these Christian fundamentalists.
That's insane. So you served so many tours and you come back and find the religious extremists have invaded your little hill country.
So, we make jokes about, the American Taliban and vanilla ISIS, but the real, we got Mennonites that are ready to go around saying every woman needs to start wearing a dress and a bonnet, to cover her hair. And we got, the followers of Christ out here. We got fundamentalist Church of Latter-day Saints. They show up wearing, the old Levi's and the old farm, the Sears Roebuck sew catalog from 50 years ago.
It's weird, but I can't really hate on the whole sewing your own clothes. If you're that passionate about something that you'll go through all that work, I can't say you're that wrong. I mean, obviously they have elements to it that are totally, you can't really understand all of it, but parts of it definitely have some sort of,
It's definitely a bizarre world. It really is. To come from this place where, you got religious holy men running around trying to tell all of the women they need to wear shawls and hijab and cover and conceal themselves, which is interesting because Afghanistan, it's a tribal country. Okay, they speak like 50 different languages because you got 50 different types of tribes there. And each one of them has their own culture, and very few of them are actually Islamic.
Right.
Okay, because they all have their own culture. There's not a lot of cars, so the culture doesn't migrate. So the little valley communities that exist, are allowed to develop autonomously. So you got one valley that's very strict by Islam, and you go just up over the hill, which very few people do because there's no reason to leave the little valley you grew up in. And you got an entirely different mindset about what is appropriate behavior and interactions for men and women. And where in the one village, they want them to wear the hijab. The next village over, the women are allowed to wear bright, frilly clothes and dance. And then you realize you got the Taliban that like to go over the hill and tell the other village that their women can't dance and their women have got to put on veils. And sometimes you got strong headmen, that say, whatever, fuck you, come over again, I'll kill you. And they go back over the hill and leave them alone.
You have such an interesting perspective coming back from, and you were intel in the war, like you were like researching these people. You got like you were trying to wrap your head around what was happening there, and now you come back to America, and this, dude.
And I see variations of what was going on in Afghanistan, and I come back to Idaho, and I see variations, and it's the same thing, because Idaho, well, the Pacific Northwest, it's hill country, it's mountain country.
It's very secluded.
When you're looking at hill country, when you're looking at mountain country, there's a certain amount of independence that has to come with it, because one, you can't depend on the government because the government doesn't know how to get to where you live.
It's a rugged place. I get you.
It's a rugged place. So the natural libertarian inclination to independence, to creating that sense of community, that sense of village, the little towns don't care what goes on in Washington, D.C., because Washington, D.C. is not going to send that little town any aid. That town is dependent upon itself. If something goes wrong, they might be able to call the Idaho National Guard, and the Idaho National Guard will fly a helicopter up. Hopefully. But the people in those little villages, they don't give a damn what happens in Washington, D.C. Washington, D.C. can write a law. The sheriff in that county doesn't care what Washington, D.C. has to say about laws. If it doesn't make sense, he's not going to arrest anybody on it. Unless you get the Fed boys, the Alphabet boys, rolling up in Ruby Ridge because the ATF got, it in their head that somebody was selling shotguns with barrels that were too short. Most of the people in Idaho do not care what the laws in Washington, D.C. are.
It's so crazy that was over a sawed-off shotgun. A shotgun is not like an offensive item. You know what I mean? It's not like well, I know nothing about guns. Like,
well, especially a
shotgun. Like,
yeah.
Yeah.
Am I blowing your mind here, Josh?
That just blew my mind. Yeah, I'm sorry I'm quiet, but that is absolutely a mind-blowing thing to try to wrap my head around. The fact that you come back from that to see like this weird
mirror image.
Fucking weird mirror image, yeah.
It's like falling through the looking glass, and you're going,
yeah, it's Alice in Wonderland. Exactly.
Dude, this was happening over there. Why is it happening over here?
Why did we go there?
It's the same sense of independence, the same sense of I want my autonomy. Now the difference is in Afghanistan, every one of those villages spoke a different language or a different dialect. Here in Idaho, everybody speaks American. Some sort of form of, well, it definitely ain't the Queen's English. We all speak American.
America.
Whether it's the Pacific Northwest or whether we go down south where we get the good old Southern drawl or
we have a lot of different cultures.
You start talking about the khakis. No, man, where's your car? Where's your car? I need your car keys for the car.
Boston seems a lot like Ontario to me. It sounds kind of funny. Like that's where people say a boot. Do you know what I mean?
A boot?
I don't say a boot. I say a boat like a normal person. But apparently Canadians say a boot. I'm telling you, that's an Ontario thing.
What's that a boot?
It's weird. You're not the only ones that have all these different cultures. Canada has that too. Like there's people that are from Vancouver that are totally different from people in BC that live in the middle of the mountains, you know, distill their own
Right.
moonshine. And that's just in BC, right? And then you got Alberta and the prairies and the north and the fucking cold. And there's lots of different kinds of people here, but we all get called Canadian. Same in America, you know. You got Southern, Pacific, New York, California. I
Yeah.
fully, I'm with Michael Malice on that stuff. I fully believe that the only good option is like peaceful divorce, and if that doesn't
Well,
happen,
and that's the thing. The central government could fall apart tonight. And most of America and Canada, for that matter, would still be America or Canada.
they would function pretty much as usual.
Yeah. We just wouldn't have congressmen and a president, and we still have all the same supply chains in place. The supply chains aren't going to disappear just because Congress goes away. The businesses aren't going to go away just because Congress goes away. The economic zones that exist, the places that share land, that share workforces. Pacific Northwest right now, we got an economic zone that we call Cascadia.
I've heard of it.
In and of itself, if the rest of the United States were to disappear, Cascadia would exist because the people who live here, work. We drive across the border from Oregon into Idaho, or Idaho into Oregon, Idaho into Washington. Spokane, Washington, Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. People live in one and work in the other, which is funny because you'd think everybody would migrate to one to work and then go back to the other to live, except we actually have people on both sides of the river. They live on both sides of the, and they cross the bridge to go to work on the other side of the state line.
I used to live in a small town in BC close to the border where people would actually go to the States to buy groceries and stuff and then bring it back.
Right. And we got the same thing. Oregon has no sales tax. Idaho has a sales tax. People who live close enough to the Oregon border just drive across, get their groceries, come back home. We got probably 5 or 6 towns that don't have a functioning grocery store because they can't compete with the sales tax, or the no sales tax
down there.
Just across the border, just over the river. But that's the reality of what happens when you have a bureaucratic border that exists within an economic zone.
It's just a line on a piece of paper, it doesn't exist in the real world.
But because of that line, and because that line exists to a bureaucrat somewhere, on one side you're paying a 6% sales tax, on the other you aren't.
Shoot, in BC it's like 15.
I'm sorry, man.
No, I live in Alberta. I'm in the promised land. It's only 5 here. Like, Alberta's pretty special in Canada. I'm here by choice, There could be other places to be, and I'm not there. That's not a mistake.
True.
I don't know. I've thought about coming to America a couple times, but I would want to get a job before I do anything like that. That's kind of crazy talk.
Yeah, it definitely helps to have a job when you move here. You don't want to.
That's the beauty of
come here without your job.
Sorry, it's like a terrible joke to make, but I'm gonna make it anyway because I'm an idiot like that. But that's the beauty of joining Uncle Sam early in your life. They pay you to travel through all these beautiful exotic places. We should get back to the medical marijuana. I feel like that's a good topic to talk about. Because
so one of the things with medical marijuana here in the state of Idaho is they're trying to create the constitutional amendment to ban it forever.
Yeah, which is insane.
Which is insane. So we got a bunch of things that are happening right now, and it's a real fast moving thing because nobody knows what's going to happen next. We have a U.S. military. I'm going to call him a hero because that's essentially what he is. He's a retired first sergeant from the United States Air Force, spent 22 years, but during a portion of that, he was involved in working with radioactive materials in the United States Air Force, part of the munitions program.
Of course.
He is now terminally ill with stage 4 cancer. And he is trying to get medical marijuana available in the state of Idaho because he could end up taking his opioids for pain management and not wake up.
That's actually kind of sick. Like that's a really
right?
sad story that he's.
Yeah. But the thing is, he refuses to use medical marijuana or leave the state because the state of Idaho is his home. But he's also one of those guys who won't drive across the border to get medical marijuana
And break
because
the law.
it's illegal.
Yeah.
He's just one of those guys.
I understand.
And there's a lot of guys like that. There are a lot of people like that. They, even though it could save their life, they won't break the law.
It's sad, but both my grandparents are like that. They're just against it. It's been the bad thing their whole life. Even though a topical CBD on like 90-year-old arthritic joints, I couldn't possibly think of a downside to that. It's just not. There are
right.
none.
But it's illegal, so they won't do it.
I guess.
And there are people like that, which is why this guy is working to make it legal. Okay, so that he can use it with a clean conscience. So he's fighting to make marijuana legal, and there's an advantage. He's a 22-year-old veteran, or a 22-year veteran of the Air Force, combat veteran, stage 4 terminal cancer, and he has an ability to create empathy when he talks to our legislators. When our lawmakers listen to him talk about his stories, they start feeling we need to get him medical marijuana.
It's a sad story.
He needs it. And we're beginning to realize that there's that level of empathy that exists among our lawmakers. It's just, can their empathy overcome their own belief that it should stay illegal, or certain other lobbyists who keep saying it's more important that it stay illegal than this United States military veteran with terminal stage 4 cancer get access to it.
And it's not like they're not even medicating him. It's just they won't let him have that.
They won't let him have that. We will give you morphine. We will give you Oxycontin. We will give you these things that will kill you.
And make you constipated.
Not careful about how you use them.
Oh, it's a disgusting life. I mean, I kind of have personal experience with that. Like when I was in the hospital, I didn't obviously take a joint into the hospital because I'm not like a wild person. And also I didn't have the resources, right? I fell off a roof and then I'm in an ambulance. What am I going to do? Prepare? But it was like literally within an hour after I left the hospital that I got my little brother to go pick me up like a bag of black market weed, and I'm smoking weed, and I didn't even take my pain pills, Joe. I have the bottle. I still have 3/4 of the freaking bottle of pills because they make you sick. Everything about what they do is worse. It's just
right. All you need something is just enough to change the way you think about the pain.
It's just a distraction. You need something to distract you.
I mean, marijuana doesn't even eliminate the pain. It just changes the way you think about the pain.
I mean, I've said before that I think that pot did take my pain down, because like my feet are pretty good, but who's to say whether or not they'd be like this with it or without it? Like there's no scientific testing on that, so I can't.
Right, which is unfortunate.
But I do feel like pot definitely helped with my injury, not just in like a mental sense, like physically with the pain.
Yeah.
But then again, I'm not a doctor.
Right, the old doctor thing.
I kind of lost you. Oh, there
No,
you are.
sorry. Yeah, I had to take a quick look for something. But no, it's so we actually have people trying to make it illegal permanently in the state. So we got this Air Force veteran who's going to our legislators and saying, please, for people like me, make marijuana legal in the state. And we have other legislators that are saying, no, marijuana illegal forever and ever and ever and ever and ever.
Literally.
And then we also have a medical marijuana initiative. And what that means is we give it to the people, and the people decide whether or not they want medical marijuana.
Like a referendum.
Yep. And that's what it is. It's a referendum. So we got all three of these things going on at the exact same time. One house of our legislator is saying marijuana illegal forever and ever. Another house is saying maybe we should make it available to people who really, really need it.
Or just stop preventing them.
Or just stop preventing them from having access to it. And then we have the referendum. Now, the thing is, the constitutional amendment and the ballot initiative would both go to a vote in November 2022.
I'm not super for the idea of somebody being able to vote on whether or not I'm allowed to use medicine, you know what I mean? Like,
right?
So I don't know if any of those.
I mean, you think about it. Okay. You have access to medicine right now, medical marijuana, or recreational, because the medical program got jacked up when you went recreational.
Well,
but you have access to marijuana in a self-medicating capacity. Okay? And you have, well, but you can count on a consistency of quality, whether you grow it yourself, you know how to grow it. So you're capable of creating that. Okay. So you have consistent quality. And that's where you run into the problem with the black market weed versus what you grow versus what you can go to a dispensary and buy. It's, can you count on the quality from your provider?
It's just a tragedy what they do with those dispensaries, because they have to dry it out to such an extent that they can guarantee that shelf life, that it's not in the same, it's a different thing than black market weed. Black market weed's usually fresher, it's got some sticky like give to it, but legal stuff you get in these little containers, it's like, little pebbles of this shrunken, desiccated, dehydrated bud.
Or you go through the process to extract stuff from it, so you end up with a wax or the dab, or you make edibles out of it, and you end up with a little cubes of CBD with 10% THC.
It's a very good point. I don't really use medical properly. Like, most people don't smoke medical marijuana. That's not a thing. But then again, like, I've never really been a purist about it. I started off as a recreational user, like.
Well, you start off and then you realize, well, okay, it actually works for my pain too. So I'm going to start using it medicinally.
Absolutely.
And that's all right, but that's where you learn, you're familiar enough with it, and you grow your own. So you can self-medicate to a certain capacity.
Well, I only started growing as soon as I fell off the roof. Like, because I had 2 casts on my feet and I was in a wheelchair. I just I knew they weren't going to arrest me, and quite frankly, if they did, how is it going to be worse? What are they going to do to me? You know,
Right? They're going to send you to prison,
and
and so
break
you
my
can.
other limbs? It doesn't make sense. I wasn't worried at that point, so I just kind of went balls to the wall with it. And then a couple of years after that, it started trickling into recreational. Now anybody can do what I'm doing. Like I've got 4 plants here. That's what normal
Yeah.
people can do,
Oh,
right?
that's normal. That's not that's well within limits in most places these days. But here in Idaho, we got all three of these different things going at the same time, and we're all trying to figure out how it's going to play out. Is this constitutional amendment going to die in the state house, or are we going to be voting on it at the same time that we're voting on medical marijuana for the state? So you literally have people who can vote to say no forever and ever and ever to people like you ever having access to medical marijuana versus the referendum or ballot initiative where the people are voting to say, yes, we need we need medical here in the state of Idaho. And then we still have this bill, which may or may not pass the House, where our lawmakers say, yes, let's go ahead and legalize medical in some capacity. Now, we got some problems with some of the ways that we call it the Kitzhaber medical marijuana, because Jeremy Kitzhaber is the guy who wrote it. With the Kitzhaber Medical Marijuana Act, because there are some things that are excluded from it that we felt were important, should be in a medical marijuana bill, like whether or not children should be able to have access to it with parental consent for medical reasons and so on. So we got all these different moving parts. And we're fighting the constitutional amendment because it's a violation of our rights. We step back and we look at it from the libertarian perspective. We look at it from the American perspective. Our Declaration of Independence, the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And
Private property.
Our private property. I grew the plant, damn it, it's mine. I can smoke it if I want to.
My body's mine. You have no right to tell me what to do with it.
Exactly. My body, my choice. If I choose to consume, that's my choice.
Actually reminds me of a question I was meaning to ask you earlier. You know how you're saying you got back and it's all of these, religious fundamentalists. What similarities do you see nowadays with the SJWs?
Well, and see, that's one of those things, because the SJWs and the religious fundamentalists, it's all the same fear-driven mentality. It's like they need something to be a very specific way, because if it's not that specific way, it messes with their vision of what their world should be. They can't live with the thought that somebody else thinks differently than they do. Which means
In weirdly
a lot of
similar ways.
Well, yeah, exactly. How do you recognize the rights of all individuals to their form of self-expression when some people who were born male want to identify as female because of their process, because of,
they're transgender, yeah.
However they came to be the person they feel that they are. And we got so many different socio-political reasons for people coming to identify as something that we can't see them as. Trauma, childhood trauma, blunt force injury to the head, just whatever, causes them to identify differently than you or I would see them as.
Peer pressure.
No, peer pressure, but how do you respect their self-identity And the thing is, we go back in history. People want to say transgender didn't exist. You dig through photos of logging camps in the 1800s.
That was the thing.
There's at least 2 or 3 guys in those logging camps with a full beard and the mustache wearing dresses.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not.
Trans isn't anything new. Okay, men identifying as women or however you want to look, it's not new. Okay, you go back in the days and you look at family members. The story of the great aunt. One day the great aunt went away to boarding school and her cousin Jimmy came back.
I mean, yeah, they're transgender. The new thing this day and age is that nowadays, if one happens, there's like 8 friends that do it too. That's totally new.
Yeah, because a lot of the times it was just a private thing. They went away as one person left and someone else came back. It wasn't this, we're all hopping on the bandwagon and we're all going to go become somebody different, all at the same time. And I think there's a certain amount of peer pressure that goes on these days that convinces people to support their friends by doing the same thing their friends did, which doesn't make any sense because then you aren't being true to who you are.
It's a weird time we live in. I was listening to the Joe Rogan podcast with Michael Malice today, and they're talking about exactly this, and they're saying it's a feature of dying empires where there's this weird,
well, and there is that
pulse of gender dysphoria, which is happening.
We go back.
You can see it everywhere. There's these TV shows with.
Well, we go back and we take a look, and it's like gender dysphoria. It's another one of those things of the dying empire. You go back and you take a look at the Roman Empire stuff. You take a look at even biblical references.
Yeah, the fall of Babylon.
Well, not even so much the fall of Babylon. The times of Jesus in the New Testament. That was at the turn. That was in an era where the Roman Empire was in the process of falling. And you saw people taking on relationships that would have been considered, unnatural here in America, 30 years ago. The Roman centurion had his gay lover. You go back, you take a look at the Senate, most of the senators, in the time of Julius Caesar, were gay. Greeks, and they were actually gay in the worst way because a lot of them had child lovers.
Greeks too.
And the Greeks, you see this at the fall of empire because we've reached a point where the things that built the empire are no longer important. Not to say that self-identity is a wrong.
Yeah, I mean,
because self-expression is a very important part of who we are. But as you trend towards the fall of empire, self-identity becomes less important and you tend to adopt things that have less to do with who you are, because you want to be something else.
I've thought of 2 weird examples where I don't think this applies and I can't really figure out why. There was the fall of the Mongolians, which seems like a totally different thing because, Genghis Khan died. But then there's the Americans leaving England. And that seems like the fall of an empire. Do you know what I mean? But that had its own chaos.
And that was its own chaos. And that was one of those things that was interesting. Reason why is because America was a very rich colony for the empire in 1776. The Americas were a colony for Britain for nearly 300 years.
And France owned half of it for a long time.
Yeah, France. So it was a colony it had been developing. You know, the rise of the American Empire, the separation in 1776, where the Americas declared their independence and went forth to create this brand new experiment in democracy with, all the garbage that came with that. You know, their experiment lasted all of 13 years. Okay. You ask, why did the experiment of American democracy only last 13 years?
I mean,
well, because from 1776 to the end of the Revolution, we had a Continental Congress, and we didn't have anything that actually created what the government just existed as it sort of happened.
what I was
and then
gonna
we
ask,
had the Articles of Confederation.
what I was gonna ask is, oh crap, I totally lost my train of thought.
No, sorry about that.
I'm sorry for interrupting you with it and then forgetting it.
But we had the Articles of Confederation here in the United States. And that represented each state was its own city state or nation state. We'll call it a nation state.
I remember.
Okay, go ahead.
Act. I was trying to think of what the SJWs would have been in that, but it would have been the Redcoats, I guess. They would have been the American loyalists that didn't support the revolution. They would have been like that day and age's like weird religious fanatical SJW types, right? I'm thinking or Canadians.
I don't
maybe.
know. I don't. the Canadians. Like, what you guys? What are you guys down there so upset about? What you the Queen's got it. The king or the King George. I guess it was King George at the time.
I think logistically we just needed the help. You guys had your feet under you, but we're too spread out to go it without the empire.
Well, here's part of what it was there were two groups of people that created the United States. Okay, you think about that. There were two groups of people that created the United States. Okay, one was the religious fundamentalists that had no place in Britain because Britain was going through this transition with the whole Protestant movement.
Right.
So England wasn't following the Pope. And you had all of the other Protestant movements that were sprouting up at the time. Calvinism was big, and all the others.
Puritans were Protestant, right?
And the Puritans were a Protestant group that had no home in England, so they decided to pick up and move. We got the Quakers, which came here from Germany. They were a Protestant group. So we had a lot of religious fundamentalist Protestants. Well, actually, they probably wouldn't have been called fundamentalists. Reason why is because they were Protestants. They interpreted the Bible different than the Holy Roman Catholic Church.
Yeah.
Or the King of England. Because you had the King of England who wanted his church, and you had the Holy Roman Empire but you had the Catholic Church who
Catholics,
had, you had the Catholics and you had the Church of England. And if you didn't agree with either of those, you had to go someplace else. Off to America. So those were the new religions. These were the Protestant religions. So in a sense, America was made by these religious groups, whether they were Puritans, Protestants, or fundamentalists. They all ran off to the Americas to make their own communities. The other group of people that made up America or the United States were the criminals.
Yeah. Well, it was a penal colony too. Like literally they were sent there as prisoners.
We had 5 or 6 states that were literally British penal colonies. The Carolinas were British penal colonies, and which is probably why they converted to slavery so easily. Yeah, because they were already used to, manual labor being performed by people who could be
Conscripted.
killed if they didn't do what they were told to do. So you have these two different mentalities that created the United States, that formed that 1776 coalition, to fight off King George and the Redcoats. You had criminals and religious Puritans.
That's funny you say that, because we think we're in such a crazy time in 2020 and 2021. But compared to, like the Puritans and a bunch of criminals, fairly unified.
Really is crazy. Is this really the craziest time in American history? No, it's not. We don't have German mercenaries running all up and down the eastern seaboard.
Yeah.
Spanish pirates, U.S. privateers, British privateers, the Cuban, pirate, Spanish pirates, French pirates.
Disney movie.
The Canadian, well, I mean, that's one of the other things you look at, because the whole Canadian Indigenous Black that is, God, I'm trying to remember what they call a group, because it's like you got Toronto, Quebec. What's the heritage that is Quebec?
Like Iroquois, and then
yeah, but the Canadians have a term for it, where it's the blend of European indigenous.
Oh, Métis. Yeah. That's the word for it. Well, it's a whole tribe up here. They're the Métis. They're half white, half native.
Yeah. But there's this culture, and it's the blend of the indigenous, the white, the French in particular.
Yeah, that's the thing about Métis too.
Yeah, we had that down in Louisiana. It's that whole blending of cultures. So Toronto and Louisiana have this same, cultural hodgepodge.
I mean, I actually know the history of how Louisiana got all those French people. It's a fun fact about Canadian history is that at one point, Nova Scotia used to be a French place. It was just filled with French people. And then the British they just decided, no, we're going to take Halifax. We're going to make Nova Scotia British. And all of a sudden, the French people needed a place to go. They wound up in New Orleans. And yeah, we have a very strong French part of the Métis up here, where it's not as well known on the other side. I don't know what word you're looking for there. In Toronto, they were the Iroquois, and in Quebec, I think they were mostly the Huron, but like the Huron almost all died of disease.
Yeah, it starts with an A.
Algonquin?
No, because they're your name in the tribes rather than the pidgin culture that was created
from I have no idea.
The amalgamation. Yeah, I'll figure it out later.
Sorry, but I'll give up your down.
You got these true melting pots, okay, where these people came together, they intermarried, they adopted the different cultures from all of the different groups and sort of created a situation, where they created a combination of cultures. or they took a combination of cultures and created their own unique culture. And that is Toronto. That is Louisiana. You see the similarities because it was the blend of French and indigenous culture with the Spanish influence. As the traders moved up and down the Mississippi between, the Great Lakes and Louisiana. So you had this amazing.
Hold on a second. I'm gonna pause for
Acadia.
So, Acadia.
There we go. Yes, Acadia. So we're back on. Anyway, that blend of culture, the Acadians, between Montreal and Louisiana, that combination of Cajun, French, indigenous, just it's pirates is basically what it is.
Well, Quebec was a prison colony, right?
Yeah.
So.
A lot of prison colonies all across the U.S. back in the day, because most of the pirate communities were former prison colonies that just rebelled. Haiti, started out as, a base camp for a pirate community when the slaves in Haiti rebelled against British occupation. So it's like you see all of the British colonies around, the late 1700s, early 1800s started declaring their independence because essentially the children of the prisoners, the children in the penal colonies finally got tired of being oppressed because of the sins of their fathers.
Australia is a crazy story. I don't know enough about the story of Australia, but it resulted in some hilarious people,
Well, yeah, absolutely. In our pirate heritage, Lafayette, we got no shortage of, grand characters in American and Canadian history, the Canadian ones don't stand out quite as, robustly as, the American rebels did, but
I could not really name a single Canadian. Like, it's a weird country to be from. I'm proud of like the mountains and the forests, but as far as human achievements,
yeah,
not much to go off.
But yeah, so back to medical marijuana. State of Idaho is working on it. We're killing the issue, and we're trying to get it legalized. We're the last state in the United States with no legalization program for marijuana, and we have two very different opposing ideas as to what the state should be. Should the state be, that last bastion of drug purity, which it isn't, which is the ironic thing about trying to keep prohibition
going,
relevant in the state of Idaho is because, well, you can have a smoking legal marijuana, or everybody's still going to keep using, trailer trash meth.
Yeah.
Right? It's like, what's your choice here? Black market's going to keep lacing the marijuana that they bring across, so we can't count on a consistent performance. You never know what it's actually laced with. So are you going to get that nice gentle high from illegal marijuana, or are you going to start hallucinating because somebody spritzed a little PCP on it?
It helps to know your growers.
Yes, it does. Yes, it does. And that's one of the reasons why the black market continues to exist, even in states where it's been legalized. The growers can still sell it off the legal market and make a profit, and people will buy it because they know their grower.
Exactly.
And they're still getting consistent quality And in some cases, even better quality than what they're getting because, well, they're getting the fresh stuff. They're not getting the dried and dehydrated stuff.
Well, it's just, the black market has a long history of supplying a product to a consumer. And, the free market is the ultimate weapon in quality increase. Do you know what I mean?
Right.
And
And
yeah,
it's what it is. Prohibition.
exactly.
What did prohibition do for alcohol?
I mean, they can't even keep drugs out of prison.
Right? How are they going to keep drugs out of a state with, with open borders? We got, and that's one of the other things. Idaho's shaped like a bong, for Christ's sake. No, but you're thinking about, you're going, yeah.
Well, I've heard it called
like
I've heard it called a gun pointed at BC.
Well, there's that too. Yes, it does
I,
look like a gun.
I got a speeding ticket in Idaho. The only time I ever went to Idaho, I got a freaking speeding ticket. And I never did pay that. I'm not sure if they'll be happy if I come back. It wasn't even my fault.
I'm pretty sure it's fallen off the statute of limitations by now.
It's been like a decade. I'm not concerned. Plus, I don't even have a passport. They won't let me cross the border without a passport.
Oh no!
So it's a non-issue. Do you know what I mean?
Right.
Plus, I wouldn't want to travel.
So we keep getting into this issue right now, and everything's moving so fast. Everybody's so confused about what's happening. Our legislators want to do one thing, and they're not even sure if they got all the votes for that. And they want to do something else, and they're not sure if they got enough votes for that. There is one thing we can count on, though. If we can get medical marijuana on the ballot, the people of Idaho will vote for it.
Yeah, I mean, that's a pretty sure thing.
Right now, I think our last poll, which was about 2 years old, 2 years old, so our last poll had something about 75% of the state was ready for medical marijuana.
The problem with letting people vote for it is they're just going to say yes to something. They don't necessarily know if it's the right deal. I mean, like, that's what happened in Canada. We were so happy about this, and then whoops, however many years later, it's still a gong show of, So I don't know. Like, it depends on what they're voting for, I guess I would say. Like,
so one of the things you're looking at is basically all of Canada made it legal at the same time. So you don't have an individual state that said, or territory that said this is the way it worked. It worked this way, it worked well. It didn't work this way, all of Canada just got stuck with the same rule at the same time. Now, down here in the United States, we have 50 different states. We have 50 different solutions to marijuana, ranging from medical to recreational to medical
Idaho.
And recreational to Idaho, where it's still completely banned. And it's illegal to sell CBD oil in the shops, even though all the shops still sell it now, which is one of those interesting situations. We have shops down here that are selling CBD oil in them in front of everybody, and it's illegal in the state. It is illegal to sell CBD oil, zero THC CBD oil, because it is still a hemp-based product.
That's cannabis product.
Right? It's a cannabis product. But we have all these shops that are selling it, and nobody's arresting the shop owners, even though the shop owners are in violation of state law. So it's not like we haven't decriminalized some things.
Societally, yeah.
Yeah, because the cops have realized that some things just going to happen. They can't arrest enough people to make it go away. They can't. Just like they can't arrest 40,000 people who drive across the Oregon border to buy marijuana and then drive back with the stuff that they just bought. They can't put 40,000 Idahoans in prison, for federal trafficking violations. And that's what it's a federal trafficking violation. They're driving across the state border, buying a Schedule 1 product, and then driving across the border with it.
Huh.
40,000 Idahoans a year. Most of them on a monthly basis, because they make the monthly trip across the river to buy their stuff.
A big bag.
And then drive back.
Huh.
5% of the state. 5%
I wonder how much worse the penalty is to take it from Canada to America than it is to take it from Oregon to Idaho. For no reason.
Trafficking. Well, that's international trafficking. That's international trafficking. I honestly don't know.
It would have to be like a certain level worse, you would think. But
you would think, except the UN made it legal.
Like, it's a very similar like line on paper, right? But there's
You're thinking about it though, but the UN made it legal. Which means Interpol. Yeah, UN has approved medical marijuana. I believe it's something new in the UN charter.
When did the UN start to think that they get to make laws in countries? Is that a new thing in like?
Ever since we created Interpol.
That's always been a thing. The UN's making laws in countries.
Well, who decided what laws the international police were responsible for enforcing?
That's a good question.
What treaty did that?
The UN, I guess.
The treaty that created the UN created the international police force. Therefore, the UN has responsibility for creating the laws that the international police are responsible for enforcing. So, international trafficking across the state border. If the UN doesn't think that marijuana is illegal, international trafficking wouldn't be a violation.
Yeah, but I mean,
of international law.
With a fairly good case to the contrary on that one, like there's a lot of people that get arrested because that one's not legal.
But the thing is you still crossed a border into the United States. So if you got caught in the U.S. with marijuana that came from across the border, but yeah, that's a theoretical, man.
Hey,
that's a straight up theoretical.
It's not that theoretical. When I lived in that small town in BC and I was 22 years old and with a bunch of crazy people from Australia, there was a significant talk of hiking. And I mean, it's a weird subject because these places make a lot of money from it.
Stretch of the border where there's no trees because they cut the trees so they can mark the border. Just walk across it with a backpack full of marijuana.
Risk being a federal criminal, you know what I mean? But there's a lot of people in those areas on both sides of the border that make their livings off that. Which, I mean, I didn't want to say that was probably why you're having a hard time getting Idaho legal, but you got to think how many people have a reason not to want it to become above board.
Well, one of the things is a criminal element. We have a criminal element that's selling marijuana in the state. If it's legalized, the criminal element has to go legit. But the thing is if we also legalize marijuana, then certain other types of drugs, the sale of those go down.
Well, and also if you replace the illegal cartels with the government, that's like a Russian doll.
Yeah. How much of the government is run by cartels? Yeah, well, the government is a cartel.
Exactly. It's just a little money in a big
one. I want to grow up and go into crime. Are you talking government or organized?
Private or
or
public
independent
sector.
operator, private or public, criminal cartel, whether it's a government, whether it's an organized crime, it's a coalition of criminals, who use violence to ensure their profits.
Can I ask you why you ran for Congress?
No, you haven't asked me yet.
Why did you run for Congress, Joe? I mean,
Uh,
I know part of your story now. You served.
well, in part of it is one of the big things for me, and the reason why I needed the congressional seat, why I ran for Congress, was it was about the forever wars. It was about how long we'd been in Afghanistan, what we were doing in Afghanistan, why we were doing what we were doing in Afghanistan. You can't end the wars created by United States foreign policy as a state representative. You got to be in Washington, D.C., where you can write laws that repeal things like the authorization of use of military force, where you fix the budget of the Pentagon so that they can't afford to continue to support foreign wars, enforce projection that keeps U.S. service members in 150 countries around the world, where you write the budget so that the United States Navy cannot afford to keep 11 carrier fleets sailing around the world 24/7, 365.
Is that a true fact?
We have 11 carrier fleets.
That's insane.
And what's really scary is every one of those carriers, even the worst of them, has 3 times the capacity of the best carrier any other country has produced.
I've actually been on an American aircraft carrier when I was a little kid because one of my uncles, when I was growing up in BC, was in the Navy for Canada, and he knew these dudes, and he's like, "Hey, can my nephew come?" And he got me on this tour, and I got to go in where they drive the shit. I was too young to really absorb very much of it,
Appreciate it, yeah.
But I remember that there was like football fields under the ship deck and like this chain that was bigger than I could wrap my head around. It was pretty crazy. And that was like an old one. That wasn't even like one of your good ones.
Right. You realize that one's been retired and there isn't another one in the fleet that is that small anymore.
It's crazy.
Yeah. But we got 11 of those. The carrier fleet, not just the carriers, carrier fleets. That's all the tending ships, the assortment that goes with it, supply ships, the destroyer entourage, all of it.
Subs.
Probably.
I wouldn't know. I'm just
name
ocean things.
Yeah.
Plus, yeah, anti-sub. You'd think you'd want a submarine. I mean, that just makes sense. It's insane. But like Trump was the president, and they held how many troops back, or like do you know what I'm talking about there? Where it's like he tried to pull them out of Syria, but then they lied about how many people were in Syria.
Right. He said he tried to pull people out of Afghanistan, and they lied about how many people were in Afghanistan and Iraq, and that was the situation. He would.
I mean, do you believe Trump? Who knows? But like, if that is a true fact, that is an incredible thing for them to admit.
That they lied about troop placements?
Well, to the goddamn person in charge of it. Like, isn't that treason? Like, I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right? That's how the government works, I think. I'm not a lawyer.
And see, that's one of those things where the U.S., we talk about a lot of things like the deep state. Okay. The thing is we rotate elected officials through every 2, 4, 8 years. Okay. There is a new person who is notionally in charge every 2, 4, 8 years.
Notionally is a good word.
Yeah, notionally. Okay, now they may be able to make some influence. But everybody who has climbed through the ranks, everybody who is a bureaucrat with 10, 20, 30, 40 years in government knows who really makes the decisions. And it's not the people we elect. Not really. It's the people with history. Now, sometimes we get somebody who's elected who's able to go in and make an office disappear. But the bureaucracies of the deep state protect themselves. They don't go away. The Pentagon is very deep state. They have an interest in protecting and preserving themselves. To the tune that right now we have probably as many generals as we do colonels in the United States military.
Means.
Yeah. Okay. Field grade officers. Field grade officers and flag officers. Okay. So what's happened with the United States military over the years was originally it's supposed to be like a pyramid. Okay. You got a pyramid. The higher up you got, the fewer people were there.
Yeah.
Okay. So you work through the ranks and then you reach the top, and the top was the general. Okay. Unfortunately, over the last 20 to 40 years, we've seen where it starts to go like this, more like an hourglass. And that there's this little choke point in the middle, but at the same time, we have more flag officers, more generals, and more admirals than we actually have at some of the lower ranks.
That's I've seen a chart like that for hospital administrators where it's like the number of doctors is a steady, heartbeat, and then the administrator one just skyrockets.
Yep. And that's essentially what we've created, is that same problem. We now have a top heavy military. We have more people who are planners, more people who are generals, more people with stars than the military actually needs. We've created seats, we've created positions for them, and these are careerists. And these careerists have an interest in preserving the status quo. They have an interest in making sure that they are able to stay in and retire very well, moving into the military industrial complex, working as lobbyists for McDonnell Douglas and many of these others. Which is why you end up with people like General Lloyd Austin, working as Secretary of Defense after getting off of a stint, as a lobbyist or executive for a major military industrial organization, less than 5 years after he retired as, I believe, a 4-star, because he was in command of CENTCOM at one point. Then he took command of CENTCOM after I got out of the Army. But, that's one of the things that you start looking at is the way those structures exist. And occasionally you can get elected officials in that are able to clean up a little bit of that. But when you go in and you try and trim an entire bureaucracy, it goes into fight or flight. It's in survival mode. And it starts throwing stuff at the people who are trying to dissolve those organizations. And most of those organizations aren't doing anything related to what they were originally created for. Or they're perpetuating the problem that they were created to solve. Okay, the United States has the U.S. Department of Education. Okay, the idea behind the U.S. Department of Education was it was supposed to reform education in the United States, make it better, make it stronger,
standardize,
standardize, create greater capability.
Yeah. Finger quotes.
Only, yeah, finger quotes. 1980, 79, so 80, 40 years. The United States Department of Education has existed for 40 years. In the last 40 years, American students have gotten dumb. Not smarter, they've gotten dumb.
I mean, I can't say it. First of all, I'm not in America. The only Americans I meet are the Americans I meet are in very specific like groups, there's either the ones I meet on the, like playing video games, or like Twitter Americans, which are a totally different breed.
Right. You got the Twitter Americans, you got the gamer Americans, you got, it's
celebrity Americans.
Different. The celebrity Americans, your Joe Rogans, and high profile. You got some high profile Americans that you see, but for the most part, when you look across the border, when you look down south into America, and you look at the bulk of Americans, the people who wake up, go to work as the coffee shop, I'm drawing a blank.
Your everyday normal guy.
Yeah, your everyday normal guy. The guy who goes to work in the factory, the guy who wakes up and goes to college so that he can go to work in a middle management company somewhere. And you look at most of those people and you realize they aren't as smart as their grandparents were. They don't have the problem solving skill set that their grandparents had. When something broke, when their grandparents were their age, their grandparents had to figure out how to fix it. And as a general rule, they did a pretty good job of fixing it.
It's true.
Nobody fixes shit these days.
They used to make kitchen cupboard hinges out of tin cans wrapped around nails.
Yeah.
But then again, Joe, like that was the Great Depression, right? That taught a lot of people a lot of lessons. And if you think about it, that was what, 1933, 1932-ish? I don't know very accurately, but what was 1922 like,
What was 1922? 1922. Height of prohibition in the United States, because 1920, the 18th Amendment was passed, making alcohol illegal across the entire nation.
Weird.
1920 to 1934. So we're right back to prohibition. 1920 and 1934.
Holy shit.
Years.
That's mind blowing, because now we have the like censorship, SJW, prohibition of like, dissent. What the fuck? I didn't expect to find something in that. That was like an empty comment.
The 1920 and 1933, 18th Amendment to the 21st Amendment. 21st Amendment was the amendment that repealed the 18th Amendment. During those 13 years, we ran into the height of the Industrial Revolution, because Black Friday, the New York Stock Exchange,
the stock crash
was going on. The Kennedys got rich running bootleg liquor. the Rockefellers got rich because the trust busting that busted Standard Oil and turned it into 7 different organizations. Rockefeller got rich off of the splitting and sale of those stocks. That's how Rockefeller became the American icon of the richest human, in relative standard for Rockefeller's day. He's richer than Bezos is today.
Yeah.
For all intents and purposes. Just outrageously, but you had the Rockefellers, and then you had the 1930s Dust Bowl. Just as they were getting ready to repeal marijuana, you had the Roaring 20s, you had the speakeasies, you had, racial integration was at its height because we had black performers, that were making it in TV. You had a Black Actors Guild,
swing music,
that existed and was performing black written Broadway shows all across the United States. The off-Broadway performances. There were things that were happening in the 20s. Black Wall Street, I think, was 1918, so that was before the Prohibition. But you were looking at all of this racial turmoil that was going on at the time. 1930s, during the Depression, you also had the reintegration rates that were going on, or the repatriation rates that were going on through the middle, because agricultural jobs all across the United States were gone. So we had groups that would go and find people of non-white descent, round them up and ship them to Mexico so that white people could have those jobs. And this was the end of the Prohibition. This was 1934. The temperance movement that created, Prohibition in the 1920s was, still going, or had proven itself to be an utter failure.
That would have been like when Roosevelt would have gone into Cuba, right?
I
remember reading about him going into Cuba, and that sounds like the right period of time to line up when they were sending all the people back to Mexico.
Teddy Roosevelt was the one, and he was late 1800s, 1880, 1890. Okay, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, he was the Prohibition president. He was the one that took us from the Great Depression into World War II.
I think he was the one I was talking about. All I know is that they're called Rough Riders, and now there's a football team in Saskatchewan named after him.
The Rough Riders were late 1800s, because that was Teddy.
Right.
Old Franklin was wheelchair bound, so he wasn't getting on a horse anywhere. But so Teddy and the Rough Riders, I think, not familiar enough with that specific.
I fucked up the historical reference. Don't worry about it. That's what happens when you just pull things out of nowhere. Although sometimes it works. I mean,
it sometimes it does. I mean, because that's where we got, 1920, 1933. When we start taking a look, because and that goes back to the Idaho Constitution and our legislation, because 1890 was when Idaho became a state. 1890 was when we wrote our state constitution. 1890 was the start of the temperance movement. The Christian Women's Temperance Union, that had chapters in every state of the United States, that was fighting for the health and welfare of the family. And the idea was the government needed to control liquor so that men wouldn't spend all their money on liquor and come home and beat on their wives and abuse their children. This Christian movement that somehow turned from this purity of the family, the virtue of family life, of home life, turned this movement for safe homes for women and children. And basically, it was an anti-violence against women and children movement in the 1890s. The Christian Women's Temperance Union, and somehow this movement against violence against women and children was turned into a prohibition movement that led to speakeasies and flappers. But this was the movement at the founding of the state of Idaho and Washington and Oregon as well. Before the 1890, it was after the Civil War. Because 1833 was the end of the Civil War. Because Idaho became a territory in 1834, which is a whole nother bag of shenanigans. But post-Civil War, states' rights, territories becoming states, creating their own rules and laws. Jim Crow laws in the Pacific Northwest, because everybody who left the South after the South lost the war, moved west. Yeah, just crazy stuff. But the temperance became an integral part of the Idaho State Constitution. And it's currently being used to justify prohibition of marijuana in the state of Idaho.
To this day, that stuff is kicking.
Right?
It's crazy to think about.
It's 100 years old.
More than.
It's 125 years old. This shit is still hard-coded into our legal code, into our legislation, into our society, into our culture. 1927.
I mean, Joe, that's why I'm a collapsitarian, because there's no possibility that a thing that was written, with like a quill, and then somebody got on a horse and took it to Washington, that is supposed to endure what's going on in like the modern world with cell phones and all this weird, crazy bullshit, like connected hive mind.
Right.
I just don't predict it going well. You know what I mean? There's no way it survives.
You're in Canada. I'm in Idaho. For us to have had this conversation even 40 years ago.
That's way too many years, Joe. Think 5 years ago. Like, it would have been possible, but not likely, because like there wasn't so much mingling. Now.
But the thing is, we are still dealing with laws that were written by men who had to hand them to other men on horseback.
Oh, Joe, I wish I had your problems, man. The stuff in Canada, it's so much older than the stuff in America. Like I've said this before, I think, but it's probably a naive thing to think, but when America, they revolted and they got rid of England, that was a fresh slate. They deleted a lot of empire that had bureaucracies that had been building up over the empire. Canada didn't get that. Canada didn't get that opportunity, and we still have that shit along with all this other new shit. I don't know. I think that's why, it's more hilariously fucked here.
Well, and you step back and you realize that the British Empire was founded on Roman Empire roads.
That's a very good point.
Canada is still stuck with bureaucracies that created Roman chariots.
Huh. That's totally a fact. No, that's a fact. And so is Australia. But that's a good point for America, like you guys got the reboot.
Well, kind of, almost. Because that's one of those weird things that you actually take a look at. And because industry still managed to survive that, we still have our own, remnants, our artifacts of the Roman Empire that exist here. Okay. The boosters for our space shuttles. You remember those? Back when we had Space Shuttle Columbia, the little booster rockets that went on the side, the big fuselage.
Yeah.
Okay. The size of those were determined 3,000 years ago.
Because of the rail track to take them out. And that was based,
Because the rail tracks, the tunnels that were created were based off of the axle widths that were created off of Roman chariots.
Yeah.
The artifacts exist. They will continue to, because we can't get rid of it, but the same thing, our cell phones, our computers that we talk on these days, those are artifacts of a 1967 TV series called Star Trek.
I don't know. I feel like we can get, like people used to think that there would have been no way to get rid of like film cameras, and then all of a sudden nobody uses a film camera anymore. It's all digital.
Well, that's true.
This isn't my idea. A friend of mine, Shooter, comes up with this all the time. He says that that's the ideal way to look at it. It like the collapse isn't going to be, hopefully, it's not going to be hopefully a big old civil war. It'll just be the way we replaced film cameras. Nobody cared even, and people didn't talk about it. It just happened.
Well, it's at some point, Washington, D.C. will just go away. And all of the rules that allowed certain organizations like Amazon to come into being because they lobbied for monopoly, they will just fade away. Right now, meat processing in America is handled by like all of two companies. At some point, those two companies will just go away and we'll start processing meat at the farm like we did, 100 years, 50 years ago. We'll go to the local farmer who may be living 50 miles outside of city limits, and there will be a qualified butcher there who can butcher on site. Someday we will go back to that. If the collapse happens, we go back to that sooner.
Yeah. All at once.
Yeah, all at once, instead of waiting for the farmer to ship his beef all the way to Nebraska so they can slaughter it in Nebraska and grind it into hamburger and then ship it back.
Yeah, don't get me wrong. I am a huge proponent for on-field slaughter. Like, that's
right. Well, I mean,
it's insane, honestly, that we even have to have this argument. Like, it makes no sense.
Right. Well, I got a friend, she's into the on-farm slaughter because she thinks, the 2 weeks that they spend, on a train to slaughter, or riding, and the day they have to get in the field, why put them through all the misery? Why terrify them, by changing their place, the way they eat, their natural surrounding? Why not just walk out in the field and put a bullet in their head, and take care of it there? They're happy right up until they die.
Oh, that's,
they're not happy and then terrified and then die.
There's legitimately no argument for the way that we currently do it, apart from
they're
that.
Happy, and then they're on your table.
They can regulate it better the way we do it. They make sure that nobody puts a steak on somebody's plate with a footprint of cow shit on it. Like, that's honestly, it sounds retarded, but that's what it's for. It's like they're just making the lowest common denominator, and that's the only thing they ever can achieve. But it's like, that's their goal, Right.
But here in Idaho, we got a certain amount of freedom with that. We have grass-fed beef. We have people who grow it here, and we can order a beef quarter or a beef half, and it'll go to a local butcher, and they'll process it, and they'll give it to us. Well, it's a little more expensive than the stuff that's run through the grocery store, you know, but we can get organic grass-fed beef here. We got a couple farms we can call them up and say, hey, when's the slaughter happening? When's the beef ready to go to market? We prepay.
Yep.
And then a refrigerator truck shows up at our doorstep. Here's your beef quarter.
Load up the deep freeze.
Load up the deep freeze. You'll eat through the winter. You got too much, throw a barbecue for the neighborhood. Thin it out a little.
We have that too.
But I mean, you got that to a certain degree, but the barriers to be able to do that make it prohibitively expensive for most Americans and Canadians.
And it has recently gotten a little bit better. Like there was a point where you had to send your cattle off to be processed in these state authorized processing areas in Canada.
Yeah.
You weren't allowed to have somebody come to your farm and butcher it on your farm. I think you could have obviously you can always do personal, you can do whatever you want on your farm and eat it yourself, but you just couldn't have sold it, right?
Right.
But now there's definitely mobile butchers going around farms doing on farm.
Yeah.
We're making progress. But
it's so slow. It's so slow.
I mean, it's like we were saying before, it's replacing these old dumb things, and there isn't even a fight about it. It's just happening.
We're realizing decentralization is slow. The legislators like grass-fed beef too. They like being able to get it from a local farm. They don't like going to the supermarket, and getting the stuff that spent a month on the feedlot. Getting fattened up with soy.
I mean, don't get me wrong. I'm not about to tell a farmer not to feed his cattle corn. Like, that's not my position. And I also don't think that there's no way to feed a cow corn and do it well. Obviously feedlots are doing it wrong, but
feedlots are doing it in a way to maximize profits. Because they sell the cattle on the weight, not on its nutritional value, but on its weight. Corn fattens them up. Doesn't make them healthier to eat, but it makes weight, and that's why they do it.
Absolutely.
Because they sell by weight.
Feedlots are so complicated. It's hilarious. If you talk to people about New York City, nobody has any problem with putting however many people on a little tiny island to the point where garbage piles up every fucking week. But if you put 10,000 cattle on one farm, everybody loses their fucking mind. And I mean, I also lose my mind. I'm not super for feedlots, but if you do it to humans, fuck them. I don't give a shit about humans, feedlot humans. It's funny. I don't know why that is.
Well, that's the other thing that's really scary about the collapse. Okay. Because you're up in Alberta.
Yeah.
Who gives a shit if the world collapses?
Yeah, but that's why I am in Alberta.
Idaho. Who gives a shit if the world collapses?
That's why we're where we are.
If you're in New York City with 5 or 10 million people, and it's 100 miles to the nearest sizable agricultural production element that now can't get food to 5 million people, when most of your food originates 1,000 miles away, those people on Long Island don't want the world to collapse because they'll be eating each other within a month.
It's wild. I can't even really wrap my head around it. I mean, I've been to Calgary, obviously that's a pretty big city, but there's still grass. You know what I mean? New York just sounds, it's totally weird.
Well, it is. There's no real way to relate to New York. Even in New York, there's no real way to relate to New York because of the way New York's divided into the different elements. You got Long Island, you got the 5 boroughs, you got, it's just divided, and each section has its own atmosphere. And it's like just moving from, one area in a cityscape to a different cityscape, but you never leave the city.
Yeah, like Chinatown.
Yeah, like China. You're in Chinatown, and then you step out of Chinatown. Only you're in a different kind of city.
I understand what you mean. Yeah.
Yeah, but that's New York. So even being from New York, or okay, maybe if you're from New York, you can truly grasp it. But if you're just visiting New York, if you're just passing through, and you realize there's Long Island, and then there's the Bronx, and then there's one of the other boroughs, and you're just going through, and it's like, but it's endless cityscape. And
I mean, in my opinion, it goes all the way to Toronto. It's just city.
Well, in a sense, that's the Eastern Seaboard.
I could be wrong.
When I was in the Army, I was stationed in Fayetteville, North Carolina, and my ex-wife moved to Maine with the kids. So once a month, when we had our long weekend vacation, I would get in the car and I would drive up the Eastern Seaboard. And driving up the Eastern Seaboard from North Carolina to Maine is how I learned to understand that New York is, because you got New York and you got Boston and you got Newport News and you got Portland, Maine. But the Eastern, it's like, it's just a metro. You never find wilderness. It's just the road, and you can't be on the road for longer than 5 minutes before seeing a town or a city or something, where you get off and you see the Golden Arches and the Target and the Walmart. It's just the solid mass of humanity and the garbage they leave in their wake. The modern Americana, the stuff that you find anywhere USA
and Canada.
It's just hours of it as you drive up and down the Eastern Seaboard. And occasionally, you get a little detour that gives you a little look at, something a little bit different. You're in Pennsylvania long enough to wander off and find, a little town with a Quaker and a little shop that sells all the little Quaker products.
I'm not going to lie to you. That area of the world definitely has like a small amount of appeal to me just based on the old buildings. Because I did a bunch of stonework here, and I always hated doing stonework here because there's no real stonework. It's all brand new lick and stick, fake bullshit on new houses.
Right.
But they have like 300-year-old stone buildings. That would be so cool.
Well, if you're getting into the Gothic architecture, going in, taking a look at the cathedrals, in New England, in New York,
Pennsylvania,
taking a look at, what the Catholics were able to bring over and recreate some of the stuff with some of the other craftsmen, particularly marble work that created, some of the state capitals. Oh yeah. I mean, stonework, when you realize that there are entire buildings, entire structures, designed to house thousands of people, that work, that were built entirely out of stone, and not with steel interweaving that concrete was poured over.
Oh, it's one of the
No,
oldest trades. I mean, apart from
yeah,
that's like
apart from the others, yes.
that's the fun. That's like the joke, right? There's the prostitute, but then somebody's got to pay the prostitute, so there's fisherman, but somebody's got to make the fish hooks. So there's the blacksmith. It just keeps going and going and going. But
Well, it doesn't matter. There was always a woman who wanted to eat and a man who was always willing to feed her, as long as she gave out what he wanted. It goes clear back to Adam and Eve. Cain and Abel.
I mean, there are houses in France that people still live in to this day that were built before France was a country. Like
Before we called France. It's the same thing. There's a bar in Ireland that was there before we called Ireland. It's still a bar.
It was a bar then.
Walls were built, and it's still a bar today. And 800, 900 years of history on the walls of that bar. And we got the same thing here in the Americas. 400 years of heritage. The Pilgrims came over, Salem witch trials. It exists. And that's if you just take a look at the Eurocentric history of it.
I was just gonna say,
if you start digging into the indigenous history,
there's a heck of a lot of history just But
you step back and realize the entirety of Americas were built on indigenous graveyards.
Yeah, but that's only because the Indians kept fighting each other. There's graveyards everywhere.
Well,
that's just a
joke. Say
the
same thing for Europe too.
Exactly.
Say the same thing for Europe too. The French and the Germans fought forever. The French and the English fought forever. And hell, some of those wars in Europe were called 700-year wars. Could you imagine fighting somebody else for 700 years?
That's a bleak existence.
That's your grandfather's grandfather's grandfathers.
There's no track, right? The war's just always been
killing each other.
We like to think that it's not currently happening, but we have already discussed that we can kind of stumble our way past World War I with what's currently going on in the Middle East. Is that not a 700-year-old war somehow? Just because we have new names?
It's only not a 700-year-old war because now the Americans are involved in it.
I don't know. It just seems like they always find things different, later.
Yeah. World War I was the Ottoman Empire. It was the European nations versus the Ottoman Empire. And we broke up the Ottoman Empire at the end of World War I and turned all of that empire into European colonies. And then we moved into World War II, and then all of those that were countries that were then European colonies for the British and for the Germans and the rest of them, they all became independent because the European countries couldn't afford to sustain the colonies anymore, or to keep the colonies under their thumb, however you want to look at it. They could no longer afford the military presence to keep siphoning the riches from the colonies. And then post World War II, the French are in Vietnam, then the Americans are in Vietnam. The Spanish still have a hold of Brazil, and then they don't. Europe eventually had to give up, the Brits had to give up India, the French had to give up Nigeria. All of that was post World War II. 1970s. What was Algiers? The French in Algiers. That was 70s.
I mean, hell, Newfoundland wasn't even part of Canada until the 60s.
Right?
And that would have been a British colony, right?
Yeah, I think so.
I'm pretty sure. There's not really many other options.
It was either British or French. At what point did the French give up on it and just say, Britain can have it?
No, it was definitely British. Yeah, no, they used like the British flag in Newfoundland till the 60s. I have
We're at the
relatives.
British flag rather than the Canadian flag, even though the Canadian still answers to the British Empire. You guys got a long, strange history too. As much as we like to talk shit about what the Americans did, what the rebels did, the revolutionaries, and the new world we created, and the fact that we violated the Paris Treaty Accords, 1780, which led to the infamous War of 1812, and yada yada yada. It's also jacked up, man. It's also jacked up.
1812 is a war I should probably know more about because like everybody talks about it because it was Canada and well, I mean it wasn't Canada then, but it's the land mass of Canada versus America. But
yeah,
I mean that's not the part of history of Canada that I know very much about. I kind of know more about like Alberta in the 30s. It's mostly what I've been looking into these days because it's extremely interesting because it's fucking like we think that everything else is a mirror of history. Alberta in the 30s went through a goddamn insurrection, tried to leave Canada. They printed Alberta dollars. Like it's spooky how clearly we're
right.
following the footsteps of the past.
Well, and that's part of the problem when you start looking at the collapsitarianism. We have history to fall back on. We've seen what happens when empires collapse. We see where the problems begin, we see where they go, we see where they end up, and we see how the collapse of one empire leads into the birth of a new empire. It exists. So the question is what can we do to learn from it? Is there a way to arrest the rebirth of empire after the fall of another?
Good question.
Because do we want another empire after this one falls?
It's how do you picture like like the Star Trek futuristic spaceships, multi-planetary? How do you picture that without like I don't see there being no empire. I just don't see how it could happen. I feel like power is it's
right. Power always ends up coalescing. But the thing is, take a look at what we have and what we do these days. Okay? Take a look at Reddit. Take a look at the internet.
I mean,
okay,
we created a trickle-down economy this month.
Well, we did a bottom-up economy. We literally used people that were on the bottom, and they cut out the people that were on top.
We forced a trickle-down economy, I guess I should have said. We made it happen.
Forced it. We created a situation that created a situation that forced the money to fall. Okay. It went from the hedge fund managers to people on the bottom. Now, true. It only happened once. It's only going to happen once. And that's because hedge fund managers got lazy and they got complacent. And one overextended himself. And we were able to create a situation for a short squeeze using the people.
I don't know
Will
about
that happen
I don't know
again in
about
our
not.
lifetime?
I think it
I
will.
don't
The incentive for it to happen still there. You know, that group of people that organize that to happen are still going to want to have. They're going to want to keep doing that, right?
They're going to want to keep doing it, but the problem is they can't keep doing it because what they did is they caught one hedge fund manager flat-footed. Do you think all those hedge fund managers are going to be so careless as to short in a way that they can get caught like that again anytime
no,
soon?
no, I'm sure
No,
you're right. But like,
you know,
that just means that they'll find another crack in the armor. I
but
love
that's
it.
it. That's it. They got to find a different crack in the armor to exploit, and they'll find it because we have the means to find the cracks these days. We have extremely intelligent individuals that are able to manage, collect, collate, and manipulate information to find those cracks, those chinks in the armor. That's what they found. They were able to go out and find, that one fund, that one hedge fund manager overshorted, and they were able to exploit that chink in the armor. And they'll find another chink and they'll be able to exploit it, but it won't be that one. They got to find a different one.
It's super weird to watch Elon Musk tweet about all these cryptocurrencies and watch them spike.
Right?
It, I mean, I don't even know what to think about it because I've been saying for a little while now that the last thing that has to happen in this sequence of dominoes is that there has to be a Julius Caesar type that comes in and starts paying people to love him because he's the populist person. And now all of a sudden, Elon Musk has the fucking masses in his pocket. And I'm not
Will
sure I
you fight
dislike
and
it,
die for Emperor Musk?
right? I'm not sure I dislike it. Depends on what Musk wants. What's he going for? I'm totally
But one of the
joking.
things I see is you already got the governor of California. Governor Newsom is calling California a nation state.
What?
Yeah, he actually referred to California as a nation state. Now, to be fair, California is currently the 7th largest economy in the world.
Absolutely. Larger than Canada.
Yeah, well, yeah. Somewhere.
I'm pretty sure.
Yeah. Okay. Now, most of it's on borrowed money, which they inject into the loan and flows straight back up to the top, which means it's largely 7th largest on paper only because they don't actually have an industry. It's all on information management.
Well, but they also export almost all of the food.
There's an awful lot of other states that export food.
That's true. But when I see the stickers on fruit in Canada, it's all California.
Which is why Californians are eating food from other states.
Yes.
Oh, believe me, the food supply chain in the United States does not make any sense whatsoever. I mean, when you harvest it in one place, ship it 1,000 miles to process it, just to ship it 1,000 miles back so somebody can eat it.
It makes me so angry.
Your food supply chain's busted.
I just don't understand how these people gain control of so much of that. Like the fact that this year they buried surplus food that they weren't selling in restaurants, just somebody had control of that, and it just makes me annoyed, and I don't really know how to, how do you even unwrap that?
You can't. You can't.
Yeah, you can't.
Here in the United States, we throw away 40% of the food on any given day. Okay, the food that makes it to the supermarket, into the restaurants, we throw away 40% of it.
Yeah. And that's like a 10%.
Gone. It's waste. Okay. So when we buy food, we are paying for 100% of it. but we're only eating 60% of it.
And those grocery stores are only selling like 30% of it because they throw out like 70% of it in the process.
And we still have people who are hungry.
Oh,
We
absolutely.
still have food insecurity in the United States, in Canada,
Well, and
we,
people feel trapped in a rat race. Like they get in a
oh
car
yeah,
to drive 2 hours to go to a job they hate, to come home to a house they hate, to continue doing it. And
to
meanwhile,
eat food they hate, that
exactly,
they
like
throw half of it away.
it's
Yeah,
trap.
we're in a rat race.
It's a
But
trap.
the thing is, it is a trap. But one of the things that we're finding is information becomes more and more available. And this is the thing that can save post collapse, the global post collapse, is open source liberty.
100%. Open source society.
Well, it's open source liberty, and it requires an open source society to exist. Reason why is because there has to be free trade of knowledge. Okay? The entire library at MIT, the entire Library of Congress, the entire Library of Alexandria exists in this medium right here. Okay? You will post this to the internet, and this will become a volume
Archive.
in the new Library of Alexandria. Our conversation preserved in perpetuity on the internet. And anybody can come back and look at it and hear what we have to say, learn from what we have to say. Hopefully. And while this conversation really only covers philosophy, we've also seen it point to a couple other issues. Society on prohibition, society recovering from prohibition,
Collapse. Mainly.
Collapse of our food supply chain, the recreation of our food supply chain. What worked before? Will it work again? How will we be able to recreate it in the absence of the monopoly?
I feel like that's going to be that situation where it's digital cameras replacing Polaroids. Like, with the amount of technology that we currently have, I'm not a very educated person. I have a completely automated grow that I don't do anything for. And, months later, I come back and I got to top up a bucket of water, and that's all I got to do. And I'm not well situated, paid, all of these things that would help that go, if I can do it, anybody can do it.
Right. And that's the thing, that knowledge exists. You didn't learn how to do that by yourself. You had video tutorials that taught you how to set up a hydroponic garden that's self-maintained.
Absolutely.
There are tutorials out there that teach you how to map 100 acres of farmland with a drone so that you can maximize the water flow, and then pay attention to the growth of whatever it is you're growing, whether it's corn, whether it's hemp, whether it's medical grade THC marijuana. There are tutorials that will teach you how to go out and do that. What you need to do to purify the land so that it's not loaded with insecticides for your future medical cannabis grow.
I mean, you can download a gun.
You can download a gun.
It's beautiful.
And literally, we got 3D printers that can print guns now. We got 3D printers that can print houses.
Yeah, those brick 3D printers.
The brick 3D printers, they can extrude recycled hemp and plastic. We got tutorials how to make hemp oil that will fuel cars, biodiesel.
Well, I mean, that's really old.
Hemp diesel.
The dude that invented diesel.
That's Ford, Henry Ford,
The guy that invented
built and
diesel.
designed a hemp diesel engine.
I thought it was a guy named Rudolph Diesel who designed it, and then he washed up dead in the ocean for designing it.
Probably.
That's like a crazy story. He invented the diesel engine, and there's a quote. I mean, it could be fake news. I don't know everything. I don't know it, but there's a quote by this guy that said the diesel engine will help all of these developing nations because they got to grow their own vegetables to create the oil, right?
All right.
And I mean, you can obviously tie together how that doesn't help certain oil magnates. And then
Right, like
this guy shows
Rockefeller,
up in
or
the
yeah.
he showed up washed up in the ocean, and I'm not sure if he had bullet holes in him, but like it was suspect.
Well, but that's the thing is so much of this knowledge is being reawoken, and it's being deposited, it's being placed where everybody has access to it, and it's like it's being replicated. Okay, so it's no longer just one Library of Alexandria that can be burnt to the ground. Not that even when they burned the Library of Alexandria to the ground, a lot of the books had already been disseminated out, and there were copies in other countries and other nations. But for the longest time, the Library of people would go to the Library of Alexandria and copy the books and take copies of the books back home. But we are doing that at such a faster rate these days. You have a copy of this conversation. I have a copy of this conversation. By the end of the day, but less than 5 hours after you post this to the internet, there will be 5 more copies of this conversation that exist, out in the ether somewhere. Maybe something about our conversation will go viral, and boom, there will be a 5-minute clip that is now replicated 200,000 times.
Oh, don't worry. At the lowest, what we can expect is that there's always going to be that one view that happens instantaneously because the feds are always watching. I'm not even joking. I'm not even joking. I upload this, and within a second, always there's this one, and I know. I'm like, hey, sir, I know. Thank you. You're the best.
This conversation will exist for the next 6 months on a file in Utah at NSA West before it eventually rolls off, because so much information is being recreated on a regular basis. But the thing is the information that needs to exist for society to continue to decentralize. No one controls the information. All the information exists. No one owns it. Nobody can stop it. Nobody can freeze it. Not anymore. Not Google. Not Bill Gates and Microsoft. Not Alphabet. Not, any of these others. We are running, not Apple, because all of this information is being spread across so many different mediums, so many different operating systems. You got Microsoft OS, you got OS X for Mac, you got iOS for iPhones, you got Unix, you got CentOS, all of these, Ubuntu. And all of these different people are preserving these libraries in all of these different mediums. So when it comes time for that information, you need to create your decentralized node.
Society, yeah. Open source.
It is an open source society, open source liberty. And once you have that open source society with all of these nodes that are built laterally, that support each other laterally, rather than through these hierarchical structures, it's a distributed architecture society. You no longer have a super server. The Washington, D.C. super server goes away. It's gone. It's done with. What you have left are 1,000 little personal computers that are all linked, that are sharing these knowledges, each taking responsibility for their own portion of the workload, learning best procedures, best lessons learned, and going, we can make this work better. Let's share it to all the other nodes. So all the other nodes now work better.
I mean, it's a scientific process, right?
It is a scientific process. Every node improves because one node learned to do something better.
I wish that I could agree with you, but I have watched in a very short amount of time the death of online piracy, more or less. And like, I could have never expected that. I didn't think that would be a thing that I would have, seen go away. But I truly believe that my kids are not going to be able to pirate movies the way I did. And that's weird.
But see, that's something that, okay. Reason why online piracy is going away is because there is a niche market now. It used to be the reason why pirating movies was so big was because there was only one source for movies. 90% of the entertainment production in the world, even 10 years ago, originated in Hollywood. One of 7 or 8 major producers represented the global blockbusters for better part of 50 years. That doesn't exist anymore. Hollywood no longer has a monopoly on entertainment.
That's very interesting, like 4th or 5th layer to all the things that are currently happening. Like, we've talked about a lot of things that are like happening because of current like timeline things, but that one I hadn't even included. But that's definitely true. Hollywood lost the authority over the narrative.
Yeah.
Like, very recently to Netflix and YouTube and all this.
TikTok. TikTok.
Podcasts.
We have input into the narrative. This conversation is going to become part of the narrative. Hollywood can't stop it. Apple can't stop it. Washington, D.C. can't stop it. London can't stop it.
Do you think they know it? Because if they know it, then why did they ban Trump? Like, that's something I can't really figure out. It seems like they don't know that they're not in control. Because if they didn't realize that they were out of control, they wouldn't bother banning Trump. You know what I mean?
The difference is Trump as a populist represented a focal point for an awful lot of really damaging incidents. So in a sense, by banning Trump, they controlled the collapse.
In their opinion. Well, I don't even know if that is in their opinion. That's in like their press release.
Okay, but think about it. Think about it. By banning Trump, okay, Trump was that last element of that failing hard drive in that super server, in that mega server. Okay. As long as he was producing, what he was doing was he was contaminating the data sources of all of the other nodes that are out there that are beginning to recognize their own autonomy. Right? You take a look at all of the Trump rallies that existed in every capital of every state. And it wasn't just in the United States.
No, definitely not. There's Trump people in Alberta.
Yeah, there's Trump people in Alberta. There's Trump people in Germany. There's Trump people in Korea. As long as Trump existed, he was contaminating the narrative.
Yeah, but I
And he
mean,
was,
those people are still here, right? Like banning Trump is not going to get rid of the people that went to that rally. They're just going to go to a different rally.
they're going to go to a different rally, but Trump's no longer controlling the narrative for those people. Okay. That de-unifies Trumpism.
I guess I
Okay.
can see what you're talking about. They like neuter the whole direction of it by making it fragment.
Right. They fragmented it because now there's no longer a central focal point for all of those conspiracy theories, for all of that. Even Q is dead. Q was leading the Trumpism for the longest time. He was feeding Trump. It was like this mutual masturbation scene going on between the two of them. I realize it's probably not an image anybody really wants to think about.
That's all politics anyway.
But they were feeding each other. And by feeding each other, they were also feeding everybody else who needed them to validate, their own position in life. And this goes back into the whole situation where we're starting to look at what Eurocentrism is in relationship to global domination. What is the role of the European descendant in global politics? America has dominated the global economy for ever since World War II. Okay. End of
Not
World
in
War II.
China.
Even in China.
China doesn't have any imports, do they?
Well, here's the thing.
I don't think they ever have. Like, that's a thing.
Where it gets complicated. Okay, because World War II truly was a global war. Okay. China was decimated because Japan went in and basically tanked them.
That's true.
Okay. Hong Kong was rebuilt by America because Britain wasn't able to rebuild it. And Hong Kong became a focal point. The thing is following World War II, there was not a single nation on the planet outside of the United States that had the industrial capacity to rebuild the world. And that was the American Golden Age. And Canada's too. Because Canada hadn't been bombed into the Stone Ages. Japan had been, China had been, Britain had been, Germany, France, most of Africa that had been colonized.
Just ruined.
World War II decimated the global economy, and the only two countries on the planet that had any sort of industrial capacity to help the rest of the world rebuild, Canada and the United States. And most of it was on the south side of the Great Lakes.
Maybe Australia?
Yeah. But even post-World War II, Australia wasn't exactly a very populated or industrial. I think post-World War, or prior to World War II, Australia was still largely a penal colony. But the Industrial Revolution had, we had recovered from our own Civil War. We hadn't been very involved in World War I. The Rockefellers had found oil post-World War I, pre-World War II. And we were full-fledged into the Industrial Revolution on a large scale. Huge deposits of steel. We had an industrial base. Post-World War II was the American Golden Age, and we dominated the global economy as a result of it. And that included, we dominated China for the longest time until Mao's revolution, which was largely an agricultural revolution. they were still 70 years behind us as far as industrial capacity. The industrial capacity that exists in China today wouldn't exist if it wasn't for American profiteering. We literally gave China the technology to rebuild their nation so that we could get cheap labor to sell products at inflated prices here in the United States.
Yeah, I mean, the whole export of jobs is it's a totally different destination. Freaking.
And it was done by American economists.
That's something I could never wrap my head around, and I've like read about it, tried to like hear their arguments for why they thought it was a good idea to become this weird only import society that doesn't actually do any like primary production. And it just doesn't make any sense to me at any, like, I don't get it.
We are a consumer culture. The
Yeah,
question is, as a consumer culture, how do you make enough money to continue to consume if you don't produce?
It's that graph of the administrators. Too
the
many
graph
bosses.
Of the administrator. And it is the fall of empire because the capital has stopped producing. All those economists thought they could turn the United States into the capital of the world and continue to exploit all of the other nations. All things lead to the capital. All roads lead to the capital. It's what they wanted to do. And because of that, we are now on the verge of a post-collapse America because the empire has no capacity to create at home.
That's interesting that you word it like that. I like that. That's definitely true. We're not like about to collapse. We're about to hit post-collapse. We're living through the collapse. We just don't know how to describe it yet. And what's coming next is post-collapse. Yeah, I agree with that 100%. That's a pretty good and somber note to end it on. Do you think?
I think so, Josh. I think so. This has been a great conversation. I really liked it.
Absolutely.
Let's see how many of the fan base out there in internet land can appreciate it.
Do you want to throw out your Twitter plugs and all that?
Yeah, Twitter, go ahead and follow me. Idaho Joe that's ID Joe 4 Congress. That's my Twitter plug. Got a YouTube, Cup of Joe with Joe, and Idaho Joe. So got my Facebook pages too. Look me up and do my own little YouTube rants upon occasion. So there's a library of those as well.
That's awesome.
But remember, folks, family, friends, community. As long as you got those three, you can make anything happen.
It's a good sign off. All right.